Well, hello. I'm here with Doug and Caitlin to talk about no more free ride for websites, but we'll talk about other things too, including turning night into day. It is Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. And let's start with Caitlin, whichever one you want to do.
Okay, let's talk about Starlink and X, because now the two are linked together because of Elon. Starlink, of course, is part of SpaceX, which is owned by Elon Musk, and X, which is formerly known as Twitter, which is now owned by Elon Musk. And this has become a bit of a conflict because, as you can see here on Engadget by Chris Holt, Brazil wants to ban X. So they want to ban the social media network. But Starlink, who supplies internet to Brazil, and Brazil has a very sparse population in areas, so they need Starlink, will not comply with Brazil's ban. And so this has created a bit of an issue, and Brazil might kick them out, say you can't do business here. I believe they've already frozen their assets in the country. So this is a problem, and Elon Musk is sort of committing the biggest sin you can be or you can make in telecommunications, which is always never be boring. He is not being boring, and it is causing a big riot. And this really shows why it's important to choose our infrastructure and telecommunications, networks diligently. You don't want these non-compliant startups just coming in and doing whatever they want. You got to follow the law.
Yeah, just it's the classic infant terrible. When you have an infant king, nobody can restrain his stupid impulses.
Nope.
If he just had somebody like a wife or a board of directors or a father or something to come down and tell him to make sense, his life would be so much better.
I think he got radicalized online. I really do. I think this is a good case of somebody who spent way too much time on social media, got radicalized. I mean, if you look back at like 2010, he was all, we're going to make Tesla. It's going to be green cars. It's going to be green energy. And he was, I mean, you could tell he was a little on the spectrum, but he was relatively normal, right? Like he wasn't, you know, ranting and raving about right-wing politics. And in fact, his positions were pretty reasonable. Um, but, over time, he just got to the point where he just became more and more online fixated, started getting into the memes, and fell into this sort of alt-right pipeline, which sort of warped his mind, much of the same way we've seen with if those of us who are younger in the audience, who have older parents, some of them or their friends might have gotten sucked into like the Fox News rabbit hole, and just became radicalized in their older age. I think something like that happened to Musk, but he just got radicalized much younger online. So
Well, it seemed to be a big turning point seemed to be the pandemic when they tried to stop people working at his factory in Fremont.
Yeah.
Then he said, I'm totally against all this COVID stuff and it's all just fake anyway. And then when Biden insulted him by not inviting him to like the meeting of electric car makers for green purposes, he decided the Democrats were just horrible. It seemed like there were a few turning points there, but the fundamental thing it revealed about him is that he's just selfish. He just wants everything his way and more money for him, and all his claims of like altruism and stuff were just fake.
yeah, supposedly he wanted like a $50 billion bonus for his Teslas,
Oh, yeah.
and
And got it, I think.
you he got it. Now the thing is that if you do the math, I think that is $10,000 for every Tesla ever sold going to Elon, while at the same time he laid off, you know, tons of workers, thousands of workers, to save about, like $500 million or something. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. He'll just do anything for himself. He is a child king who
Yeah. Well,
needs
I
to
mean,
be deposed.
I think also his goal of having as many children as possible in order to enhance the human race because his genes are superior is another big clue. There's another billionaire I read about recently who became a sperm donor so he could have more than 100 children for the same reason. This is the temptation all the way back through history. The nobility feel like they are the master race and they should really, the world would be superior if they were all their children. It's a kind of madness, like an
And
extreme narcissism.
Yeah, and the thing is, and he's probably does have some narcissistic traits. And in fact, uh, one profession that attracts a lot of narcissists is the position of CEO at companies. So it would not surprise me one bit if he had some amount of narcissistic, personality disorder, but I can't diagnose. I'm not qualified.
Yeah.
I can't say if he does or doesn't. So
No, and I think the same thing's true of presidents and politicians in general. They feel like they're superior to the most common type would be I'm better than everyone. I should tell everybody what to do.
it depends on the politician. There are generally two types of politicians. There's the yeah, I want to be in power, power is good type of politician. And then there's also the I am a public servant politician. And if once you've gotten into politics long enough, you can sort of tell who's who. But most voters, in my experience, have a very difficult time figuring that out.
Well, I think everybody's a mixture of the two and they move from one to the other.
I mean, no one wants to be powerless. Okay.
Well,
But there's,
yeah, you can't achieve anything if you don't
yeah,
win. So you do have
right.
to compromise your principles enough to win, but hopefully you have some of them left. And so it's a slippery slope.
Right. But that's very different than being a narcissist who just wants to get in for power and doesn't have, these grand ideals. We're talking about, people like Donald Trump, right?
Yeah,
Who
but
clearly has no interest in public. Like he would not do anything out of the goodness of his heart for his community. I mean, come on.
yeah, but I mean, I think it's just a continuum like sexuality. There's extremes, but most people are kind of in the middle. They have some desire to be altruistic and some principles, but some ability to compromise those to get more power.
But that's a bit like saying everyone is on the spectrum.
Well, I suppose.
I mean, everyone has certain things that,
Yeah.
are quirky about them for sure, but I wouldn't say everyone's on the spectrum. I mean, come on.
Well, but
Just like,
I think it's
yeah,
not a binary. I think it's not really a binary thing. I think everyone has a mixture of both properties.
Yeah,
I
so let me jump in here.
Yeah.
Several years ago, the the radio show This American Life had an episode called the Psychopathy Test. And the Psychopathy Test was created to see if criminals should be released. It was the determination, somehow we can quantify to make it more subjective than objective. Did I get that right? Or did
no, you reverse that.
Yeah.
yeah, I normally do that. Okay. To make it more objective than subjective. Did I get that one right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So they have given the test to criminals who have life sentences to see if maybe they're worthy of being released. And interestingly, they've also given this to CEOs of companies who should be locked up for the rest of their life for failing the test.
Yeah.
And what were the results? Did they conclude anything?
Yeah, they concluded that some of them, and I don't think they have names, or I do know that they interviewed one CEO who took the test, and they concluded that if they were in jail, they'd be not eligible for parole.
Well, sure.
Again,
I'm
yeah.
skeptical. I mean, what I would like to hear is can they actually tell if you're going to reoffend? That's the point of a
No.
parole hearing. And so does
No.
the test actually mean anything? And the answer is pretty much no, right?
Right. Yeah, it's pretty much no. And what's interesting is they have people who faked being psychopaths to not get into regular prison so that they put into a psych ward. And they've been spending more time in the psych ward than if they just would have been in the regular prison, because in the psych ward, they have no possibility of getting out. And they originally thought that they could get into the psych ward and talk to the psychologist and say, no, I'm not crazy. I know I did the crime. You should let me out early. And I'm proving it to you. And that's proof to the psychologist that they are crazy, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an unwise move. Once you're in there, it's awful hard to talk your way out.
Yeah. So anyway, if you're interested, it's This American Life episode number 436, May 27th, 2011.
Hmm.
And it is a pretty interesting one. And if I remember right, the president of the time, so this would have been maybe in the 1990s, early 2000s, of Sunbeam. Do you remember the company Sunbeam?
Not really.
They
Didn't they
made
make mattresses?
no, they made
Oh.
appliances like iron, Sunbeam iron, kind of home appliances is what I remember. Like irons, and what else do you have? Not vacuum cleaners, but just small electrical appliances. Anyway, he was known as the hatchet man. He loved going into companies that they acquired, standing in front of 1,000 people, just telling them, "You're all fired." And he loved doing that.
Like
So he was
Ross
called
Perot
the
or
hatchet.
Donald Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, he was called the hatchet man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway,
So anyway, Sam, I agree with you. I believe, like a lot of things in biology, it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And another spectrum that people argue over is sex. Are
Right.
you male or female? And sex is a spectrum. It's clearly a spectrum.
Well, you could also
I
say that
don't.
90% of people fall in one category or the other, but the
Yeah.
categories are kind of broad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, it's like height,
Yeah.
right?
Aren't-
You can say people are tall, people are short, but it's a spectrum. You're not one or the other.
No, I mean there's 6 sexes as far as I can tell in human biology. There's XX, XY, XXY, XXX, and a few others, but 6 is all there is, and you clearly are in one of those.
No,
Well, here
not at
let's
all. And it's not connected to the
yeah.
chromosomes either. It's more
Wait,
in development.
it is linked to the chromosomes, but not entirely.
Right.
Other chromosomes are involved in determining sex. And Caitlin, there are 20, if you use sex as a determination, or pardon me, if you use chromosomes as a determination of sex, there are 27 different combinations of chromosomes that are that determine sex, if you will.
And my understanding is it's not even the chromosomes, it's the environment during development that influences
It's
sexual expression.
it's
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, and there's a bunch of intersex, conditions as well like that. But the point is that you can clearly be, non-intersex, XX or XY. I mean, and just be in that. And most people are. I mean, there's a large number of intersex people.
Sure.
And I'm not
Yeah.
trying to erase them, but I'm saying that everyone's on the spectrum. Once again, I don't think that's entirely accurate when it comes to sex, because it is. There's definitely like a lot of things you can be, but it's like Sam, what color is your hair? Is it on a spectrum?
Well,
It's
sure. And I would like to. There was actually a consciousness raising politically correct exercise for like non-discrimination at City College I went to that I thought was very interesting. And they had a room full of people and they had a series of things like if you cry in movies, take a step to the left. And if you hit your thumb with a hammer and you don't complain, then take a step to the right, and a whole bunch of things like that, the stereotypical male and female things. And after about 20 of these, the room was just full of people in random positions. And they said, you think that men are one thing and women are another, and there's a clear distinction, but the evidence is not with you there. And I think they're right.
Oh, well, we're starting to get into gender and stuff, and that is more of a spectrum than sex. But
well, anyway,
some things are on a spectrum for sure, but not everything is. And you can't say like everyone is autistic because everyone has some kind of autistic traits, which is my original point.
Well, no, this is something that I remember from the DSM-3. They said it's not a healthy person explores all of these extreme personality traits under appropriate conditions. They're just not stuck in one of them. There's a time when they're paranoid, a time when they're egotistical, a time when they're angry. That's health. Health is being able to move from one to the other as appropriate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Anyway, I got another topic here, which I thought was probably the biggest story today. On last Tuesday, a judge ruled the big tech's free ride on Section 230 is over. And if it applies to TikTok, the argument of all the Facebook and TikTok and Twitter and all that has been that because of Section 230, they are just intermediaries like ISPs, and they're not responsible for any content their users put on there. But since TikTok has an algorithm and recommends more videos, they have a case where it recommended self-harm videos to a teenager who killed herself. The TikTok choke yourself challenge or something like that. And they said, since you recommended it, that's an editorial decision, and your algorithm means you are liable for the content. That was the decision made here, which is a huge one. This could affect all the social networks that they be responsible for what they recommend. The obvious one is YouTube, but I think it would now apply. I think now it would especially apply to Twitter, because at one time Twitter would just show you people you followed, but when Elon bought it, he complained that his tweets weren't getting seen enough, so they pushed his tweets into everybody's feed, whether you follow him or not, and they'll be doing more and more of that. So this may really change the character of the social internet. So I think it's an important ruling. We're going to be hearing a lot more about it. Anyway, what else have you got, Caitlin?
I figured out how to click my unmute button. That's what I got.
That's
So
a good
I have
start.
I have an article here about recall again. This is on Tom's Hardware by Christopher Harper. And okay, so this is really weird. Microsoft is starting to roll out Windows 11 recall. And for people that maybe don't remember, recall is that stupid AI feature that records your desktop, puts it in a database for everyone to read, stores all your passwords, like everything's in plain text, all your secrets are there. It's perfect if you want to like steal information. People are like, no, we don't want this. I mean, I get why it could be useful in certain situations where you need to sort of go back and figure out what you were doing at a certain time. And this would be a godsend for corporate machines where you need to have detailed forensics. Let's say you suspect a worker is maybe sending information to your competitors, having recall to spy on them would be very useful. But most people don't want that for some reason. I don't know why. So
Anyway, people do want it. Apple's going to build essentially this into the new iPhone.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a big issue in and of itself. But Microsoft is trying to roll it out, and they updated Windows and added the uninstall or remove recall to the Windows accessories or Windows add-on page, so you could remove it if you want. And now Microsoft is saying that was a bug. So it's a glitch that there is an uninstall feature that was programmed into Windows 11 24H2 update KB 041865. So basically, okay, what has happened here? What do I think happened? I think some programmer was like, yeah, no, we need an uninstall feature for this, just like all Windows features. And they put it out, and one of the product managers didn't realize that the other teams were working on this. And Microsoft said, no, we don't want people uninstalling this.
And now the question is why?
Yeah, so why doesn't Microsoft want people uninstalling recall, which is not a necessity to run Windows and adds very little utility, I think, to most users.
Yeah, so do you have a theory as to why? Because I do.
I have theories, but I think they're so wildly speculative. But I think a lot of it has to do with gathering user data for training.
Well, I assume they're going to sell the data. I mean,
well, same thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's yeah. I know there's already ads in Windows 11, and they're talking about it just being an ad-supported product. So another way would be to, just like the apps on your phone, gather your data and sell it.
Yeah, they could say, what is the user doing at the moment, or what sort of content do they like right now? And they can serve ads based on what the user is doing. And they don't even have to send the exact web pages back to Microsoft. They could just be like, oh, we're looking at your browser. We see you like looking at websites with cats and hacking, and here's a book about cats who hack things, go buy it.
Yeah, and more people have been talking about how now it's hard to find good data on the web, and all AI futures are going to depend on finding a source of good human-generated data. So the data may be the most valuable thing.
It is, and then we're going to start having computers, or rather machine learning algorithms, operating Windows for us, screwing up that data as well. And there's been some data suggesting that there's essentially an AI collapse when AI starts training on itself as the data gets poorer
Right.
and poorer.
Right.
So,
yeah. So, yeah. Well, this actually takes me to the stories I've got here about surveillance. The Texas State Police are buying a product, and apparently a lot of other law enforcement have done it too. Let me get the name of this thing. It is Tangles from a company called Penlink. And what it does, it's an AI platform that scrapes information from the open, deep, and dark web, and it has an add-on feature called WebLoc, which purchases location data from the data brokers, like the one that just got hacked, National Public Data, that know where everybody is because of the apps on your phone. And the courts have ruled that if the police want to track your car and know where it goes, they need a search warrant, but they're doing this without a search warrant using the commercially available data. And the argument is that's legal because it's anonymized. But of course, the anonymization is useless because if they know where your car goes, they know where you live, they know where you work, and it's very easy to figure out who you are. But anyway, this is getting more popular across police departments, and the privacy advocates are, of course, very concerned. It does seem to be an end run around the Fourth Amendment. And I see this in all the science fiction shows. The cops just push a button and they know where everybody is and have pictures of what you're doing everywhere. And we apparently are moving rapidly into that world. Police surveillance. So I had some other stories related to it. In Venezuela, the anti-journalist forces of the government are so strong that the newscasters have switched to using AI-generated avatars, so they don't ever have their face in the news and they don't let you know who the journalist is anymore because they'll get punished by the government. And this is important because Trump has repeatedly promised to do the same thing here. And this is part of Project 2025, is to create policies so they can arrest journalists and who say things they don't like. So we may be they're here, depending on the course of the next election. It looks like it's Valentine's Day over there.
yeah. Let me have parts of this heartwarming story.
Oh, there you go. That's a good idea. Anyway, so what have you got, Doug?
Wow, that's an interesting story. I wonder why they're not doing that in China.
Oh, I think they do it totally in China. Just they're not the most of any rules against it. I think China, you have this social credit score where they measure everything you do. You jaywalked, you got on the bus without paying, your social credit goes down. You helped an old lady cross the street, your social credit goes up,
Yeah, yeah. All right, so here's one. This is kind of an interesting story. So are you familiar with TV shows, America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent? Very popular TV shows.
Yeah.
So what if someone were to take the video of the introduction of America's Got Talent, and then they switch and they put an image of themselves singing what the song is with the actual person on Americans Got Talent. So they've switched the image to themselves, and they've essentially made what I'll start to call a parody of what's going on. And the camera switches back and forth between the judges and that fake person or the parody singing. And the goal is to pawn it off as being a clip from America's Got Talent. And if you aren't that familiar and you look carefully at the background, you can kind of see that it's not the same background as Americans Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent. So what they're doing is they're posting these and they're getting millions of views, which means the musicians and the other people who are actually entitled to the royalties are losing out on this. And the legal argument is that it's a parody except it's not a parody because it's a fake or it's an imitation. There's no parody element to it. In other words, there's no comedy, there's no satire, there's nothing. It's made to look like they're on the actual show.
What's sort of like Soul and Valor.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
make it seem like you were great enough to be on TV when you weren't.
Right, right. And you're profiting from it. And you're actually stealing from the other people that should be profiting.
A whole new genre of deep fakes I hadn't thought of.
Yeah, it's clever. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's pretty, right? The complexity to do something like this is just simple video editing with a sound or a video dub over somebody singing or miming.
Yeah, it's pretty clever. And speaking of AI, that AI generated cat that Caitlin has is pretty realistic,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
Cat.
Caitlin, you got another story for us?
I do. This one's going to be really short. So Linux,
Okay.
It's finally the year of the Linux desktop. We
Again?
Well, I'm
Again.
on a Unix desktop.
yeah. So it's finally the year of the Unix desktop. Again, let me show the article here. Here we go. So this is on gaminglinux.com by Liam Daw, sorry. And it looks like in August, Linux market share has gone up to 4.55%, up from July, which is 3.12%. Now, I was interested about where these numbers come from. And this comes from something called Stat Counter, which is looking at browser user agents to figure out how many people are using Linux and how many people are using Windows and how many people are using Mac OS. And it turns out that, Linux has seen a great increase of users lately, which may or may not have anything to do or something to do with the end of life of Windows 10.
Are they counting Android as Linux? Because then I think there'd be a little more.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure that out. And so if you go to the website, Star Counter, it does not work. And I think the Android, if they were including Android, I think it would be a little higher than 4.55%.
Yeah, I guess you don't call that a desktop.
Yeah.
Although they ought to. I think it's what most people use to compute these days.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I cannot get details. I was wondering the same thing. Their website is completely down at the moment. So
I remember 20 years ago, there was a huge screaming headline, Linux is now number 2, because at that time, Windows was like 95%, Mac was like 3%, and Linux was like 2%. And finally, Mac dipped slightly below Linux once. And they said, there, Linux is number 2. But it was similar ridiculousness. I mean, Linux on a desktop is pretty pointless. Very few people would actually use Linux on a desktop machine as their main operating system.
My, you know what's probably preventing this? Because this is technically a tracker. My DNS blackhauling, it probably prevents me from going to their website. So, oh well.
Oh yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, I've got one more, which I thought was quite appropriate. The Proton VPN has made a new VPN, and I'm very interested in this because City College has ruthless filtering the internet. Even VPNs don't go. And one thing they block is RDP, so my students can't use Azure virtual machines. I don't know how the Azure classes survive at City College, but the latest, I always keep thinking, why isn't there a VPN that really makes your traffic look just like HTTPS? And that's what this does. They made a new one called Stealth, the new Proton VPN protocol. I'm going to try it out. Apparently it has a free version. So I'm going to see if it lets me use RDP from City College. That would be my big goal. And that to evade their ridiculous censorship. About 20% of my news articles get blocked by them. They block anything related to cryptocurrency and many other things for no apparent reason. So I'm interested to see how good this is. It seemed to me obvious for a long time. Why don't you just make everything look like HTTPS? You should be able to make it indistinguishable to the firewall and filters. And but it hasn't been done yet. And apparently that's what these guys have done.
So Sam, when I was at City College, I had the same issue with their stupid firewall. And what I did is I created an OpenVPN server that ran on TCP instead of UDP,
Yeah.
and I put it on port 443.
Yeah.
And that alone is indistinguishable um, from standard web traffic because it's still using TLS.
It should be. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think that doesn't work anymore, but I'm not sure. I've tried various different things down through the years, and they work for a while, and then they quit working because what they've just got a Palo Alto firewall, and Palo Alto keeps updating it. So I think by the time anything becomes popular, they block it.
All right. Well, if you want to test that, let me know. I can give you access to my VPN.
Yeah, I think I've got one like that anyway. But anyway, we'll see if this thing works. Anyway, it's an interesting technical exercise to punch through their security. Anyway, have you got another, Doug?
That's it for me this time.
How about you, Caitlin? I know you've got the one about turning night into day anyway.
Oh yeah, so we'll talk about this really briefly because we were talking about this before before we started the podcast.
Yeah.
This is sort of an off topic, but we were talking about it in private, which is this Reflect Orbital company, which wants to essentially put a bunch of satellites in sun synchronous orbits. So that it might not be a term a lot of our users have or viewers have heard before. Now, what a sun synchronous orbit is that it's this near vertical orbit around the Earth, but because the Earth is slightly oblate, it sort of pushes the satellites so that they're always facing the sun. So, they'll always basically get sunshine throughout the year, essentially. That's a sun synchronous orbit. Sunlight hits these satellites. The satellites then reflect the sunlight back down onto the planet, like in this diagram. And the sunlight will then go onto solar panels. Now, this seems like pretty cool. The problem is that this is complete nonsense. I don't know why this is being taken seriously. There's a few issues with this. One, you would need giant reflectors for this to work. Like, yeah, technically this can be done, but they would have to be just ginormous reflectors. And they would have to be parabolic and pretty much perfect so that they can just create a beam of light over the solar panels. Now, this has been done before by the Russians with much bigger equipment. And they said they basically got Moonlight out of it, which if you've ever worked with solar panels before, you would know that, Moonlight is not good enough to generate much power. In fact, there's a lot of electronics built into solar panels, including diodes and stuff, which have voltage drops between them, as well as regulators and stuff. And that's not even enough to power that equipment. So you're basically still getting zero energy out of the system if you're just having Moonlights. And of course, these are orbiting. So you can't simply have a beam of light, 24/7. This would only work since it's in low Earth orbit at dusk and dawn. So right after the sunset and right before it rises. And think about surface area. So these satellites aren't going to be that big. They're going to be, a few meters wide as far as reflectors. But if you've ever seen a solar panel farm, you know that these things are kilometers in size. And so if you have let's say you have 100-meter, and this is much bigger, a 50-meter, let's say, reflector going on a, 1 kilometer, stretch of land, is just going to spread the light out so much. Plus it's reflected light. I mean, there's just no way this could possibly work. And yeah, just it's ridiculous. If you go to careers, you can tell this is just ridiculous because so here we are on the careers page and they have open roles. And they have down here propose a role. They don't even know what they want. They're just like, we need these people, and if you think we need this, let us know. And yeah, they don't have any lawyers on staff. And so that's one of the big things about putting stuff in space. You need a whole lot of dealing with the FAA and NASA and government regulations around the world because you'll be flying over foreign territory and all this stuff, FCC regulations. You have to control the satellite. I mean, there's so much law and stuff involved in putting stuff in space, and they don't have a single lawyer. I mean, it's it's not a sham, but if you think this company is going to release a viable product, I have a bridge to sell you, and it's really awesome.
Yeah, it
So is
seems
this
like
like,
just a couple of drunks with an idea without putting any real thought into it.
Yeah, they probably should have done some more math, I think, for setting off on this mission.
so, in Italy, between Milan and Switzerland, there's a small village that's in a valley that in 2006, they installed a giant mirror that shines down on the town square. Have you ever heard of that? And I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, the name of this, but it's an Italian town that uses a giant mirror to reflect sunlight onto its square during the winter months. The mirror is 8 meters wide by 5 meters tall. Let's do that in American. So that's a third, right? Divide by 3. And it was installed in 2006 to alleviate winter darkness, boost community morale, and attract tourists. What a tourist attraction to see a big mirror.
Yeah, and I've heard of this.
Anyway,
I've heard of people that arrange mirrors to shine natural light through their building too. I mean, that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, that makes sense. So the claim is it's had a positive impact on the community.
Well, it could work, but that's because
Yeah.
the mirror is not a million miles away.
True.
Well, yeah,
True.
yeah. So we think of like low Earth orbit between 100 and 200 kilometers up, but the reality
Yeah.
is that it's never going to be just right above you. So there's always going to be a slight angle. So it's really going to be like 400 kilometers away, which is much further away than the, mountain that, is right next to you. And plus, since it's orbiting, you get about a 4-minute window of light. So
And
I
clearly,
mean,
it would only work if you had enough mirror to add up to the visible area of the sun. So it would have to be huge.
right.
Yeah.
And what's the point?
Just
The
so you get
point,
like a little
yeah.
bit more power out of your solar farm,
Yeah.
like 4 minutes more power. It seems hard to understand how this would be enough money to justify anything.
I mean, to be fair, at dusk is when power is needed most. So during the day, there's a lot of solar power. People at home are using solar panels to generate their own power. So there's this like duck curve where it goes down and up throughout the day. So it goes down midday and then up at the demand goes up in the evening and then goes back down. So demand is higher in the evening. And if you could extend daylight hours, that would alleviate some issues. The problem is that, you also have to keep electricity cheap and affordable. And having a space fleet surrounding Earth of these small little reflectors, and they really are small comparatively. It's not going to be that successful.
There was an
So
older
the,
idea around for a long time that you would have a satellite with like a solar panel, and it would then take that and turn it into microwaves and send a beam of microwaves down. That's been an idea that's been around for a long time. Would that be any better?
Yes. In fact, anything you could do at geostationary orbit for solar collection or a Lagrange point or something would be much, much better. And then you would, like have a geostationary satellite with giant solar panels. That's more viable, but it's still more expensive than just putting solar panels on the ground. So why do it?
Yeah.
the other issue you're going to run into is a biological one with animals and plants. And specifically, some plants are sensitive to the amount of sunlight, and they have some mechanism that's a timer that they use to tell if days are getting shorter or longer.
Right.
So
And this would affect like the original Tesla proposal that he had, where he was going to make a giant Tesla coil and light up the whole night sky so there would no longer be any night. This is back before anybody thought about environmental impact,
Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But I think this is sort of like spin launch. Have
I
you
vaguely
followed
remember
spin
that.
launch?
I do know spin launch. I think spin launch has more potential than this, though.
It's just we spin something and then send a rocket up that way, right? By just building up
Right.
speed. Well, that
Yeah.
sounds sort of like a big gun, not completely insane. But I think the problem is the friction of the air would stop you before you get too high.
Yeah, I was gonna say that the better solution that I've seen is where you have these essentially like vacuum tunnels that accelerate up a mountain essentially
Yeah.
Yeah.
until you get really high speeds, and then at the very end, the spacecraft will then break through the barrier. Because the biggest issue with getting to space isn't Earth's gravity, it's the atmosphere. It's basically a soup, and you have to go really fast through the soup, and it's just a big problem. So if you could, um, reduce the amount of fuel that you need by spinning it initially like a centrifuge to get it go fast, and then send it up a vacuum tube to get it past, a large portion of the lower atmosphere at high speeds. That would be helpful for
Well, it's
sure if
good.
you get
It's
it
good.
working correctly.
Yeah, well, it's good that people think about these things and test them out, but a whole lot of them are garbage.
Yeah, I mean, how practical it is, I
Yeah.
don't know. Like, there's probably there is a whole bunch of engineering stuff you have to think about, especially if afterwards you still need these giant tanks of stuff and you can't have the G forces too high on it. I mean, there's a bunch of restrictions you need that might just not make it super practical. But as far as giant reflectors in the sky, or not even, I should say not giant, smaller reflectors, because these aren't really that big reflectors, from what I understand. That's just mathematically not going to work.
Well, this is the case with all science, like medical advances. There's ideas and even like prototype studies, but there's a whole lot more work to actually make something practical where you can make it at
Right.
scale and it really works well enough and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this should be funded by a university, not a startup, because they're just not going to make money off that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Well, I'll tell you, Lawrence Berkeley Lab developed, Lawrence came up with the cyclotron. Stanford has the linear accelerator. And in between that, Lawrence Berkeley Lab came up with the Bevelak, which was a cyclotron that went linear. So you'd speed up the atoms, I believe, in the cyclotron, and then accelerate them linearly.
Yeah. Did it
So there's
actually have some reason
yeah.
to do that? It ended
Oh
up
yeah,
having
yeah, yeah. It had, I believe, a 40-year lifetime,
okay.
and it did quite a lot in the 70s and 80s in medical and biological research.
Yeah.
But it came to an end of its useful life.
Yeah. Now we got CERN.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's it. You folks have any more?
That's it for me.
All right. Well, that's it. And we'll have another
See you
one of these
Friday.
on Friday.
Yep,
Yeah. All right.
sounds good.